Hey, welcome to Art with Ian. Today we're talking about character design. That's coming up next. All right, welcome to the character design series. This is episode 5 or 4, excuse me, refining the design. So today we're going to be doing the line cleanup and rendering of one of our characters. I figure one is enough to kind of show how my process works. Doing all 5 would have just taken way too long. I'm not going to do any quick tips on why we do this. This is the part that everyone does. It's usually more about what you do leading up to this part that a lot of people don't think about, or they skip those steps. So we're just going to go ahead and jump straight into it and talk about the process. All right, so I start by just taking my original sketch, turning the opacity down, and going over everything with just a cleaner line work. And this step isn't necessarily essential if you plan to paint your line work completely out. But for these characters, I'm planning on leaving a little bit of line work in. So I decided cleaning up the line work would be good. Also, sometimes this step is really helpful in just solidifying design ideas that you have. Like you might add a few things, take away a few things during this process before you start painting. I'm just using the hard round pressure brush. So I like using this brush because it gives me a nice solid and opaque line, but also has a little bit of dynamic control to it. So it's not just that same thickness of line all the time. I didn't always use this brush for my line work. I used to use a number of different brushes. I used a sketching brush, which I think eventually I realized it always looked a little too like it looked a little too faint. Like there wasn't enough like actual opacity happening with it. And then I also used a calligraphy brush for a while, and I ended up using I made an inking brush, which I really liked quite a bit, but I ended up realizing that it was a little harder to wield than this brush. This brush is at least for my tablet that I use, my Intuos, it's a lot more, it feels a lot more like the pressure that I put down from thick to thin feels more natural to the way that I paint. So I eventually just decided to stick with this brush for all my line work. And I use it for sketching too. To rotate your canvas, if you, like me, if you have certain angles that are more comfortable to draw like straight lines with and things like that, to rotate your canvas is just hit the R button on your keyboard, and then it brings up the rotate option, and you can rotate whichever way you want. Then you can, just hit B to get your brush back up, paint what you want to paint, and then to rotate back, just hit R again, and if you hold the shift button once you get close to straight, it'll lock it into the actual straight dimensions. Here I'm working on her holsters for her blades, and I haven't actually decided officially if the blades retract like lightsabers or if they just charge up with energy when she wants to use them, and then then she shuts them down and they stay like they're still like a solid piece of whatever material, kind of a thing. And then but the holsters, I think, work based kind of on the idea that the blades still exist even after she's done using them, so they don't retract like a lightsaber. Obviously, if this was ever going to get developed further than just this concept art, that would become a way more serious topic. Like things like, for example, just the IP of Star Wars is, you start doing retractable energy blades, and that's been done in one of the most iconic IPs ever. So you might want to avoid doing that, just for the sake of people calling you out on just totally copycatting, kind of a thing. I mean, it's already a big enough copy that I'm doing energy blades, but at the same time, it's like it's one of those. Well, it's worth copying because it's such a cool looking thing, right? It brings a lot of nice saturated color to your palette. It's a light source that's not the main light source you can use if you want to light up the extra features under the underside of things. Depending on your light setup, if your main light source is super bright, you're not going to get a ton of light from that, but it's there as an option. It's just really nice to have secondary light sources, especially in a sci-fi scene. It just helps it feel more sci-fi. It just does. So I'm just in here now making a few decisions about the boots. Generally speaking, when I do my cleanup work, I do add a few more solidified decisions to the design, which ends up resulting in a bit of still scrubby lines. And so technically speaking, I could, if I was going to really, really go for like a line art version of this, I could go back in and do yet another cleanup, even another one after making all of my extra decisions, just to even get it more clean. But for me, to some degree, you start draining a bit of life out of a drawing when you get overly clean with it. I don't know. It's just, for me, it's not that huge of a deal. Unless you're working for a client and they specifically ask for, like a super clean style. Okay, here I'm trying to make a selection around. So what I'm doing now is I'm making sure I connect all of my lines, right? There's no gaps. And what you can do here, if you make sure everything's closed up, all the lines are touching, you can use the magic wand, which is W is the hotkey for that. Click the area outside, then go to select and invert your selection, and you have an automatic selection. Then you can fill that in and you've got your mask, just like that. I mean, that is the way to do it for sure, as far as speed is concerned. And then once you've got your mask, you can go ahead and start painting your, basically, your flats, just your local color, no shadow, no light. I'm still using that hard round brush to do this. Thinking about the color palette of the overall image as I choose colors for her. So basically, you have to kind of decide in your head what's going to work with everyone and decide a little bit about what everyone's going to be wearing color palette wise before you get too invested in the color palette of the first character you color in. Because if you really like the color palette you choose for them, but it doesn't really work well as a group with the group and you're going for a kind of a group cohesion, then you're in trouble. So I'm thinking, desaturated browns, darks, brick reds, those kinds of colors are going to be somewhat common. And so I'm going to play with like those color families, warm grays, cool grays. Basically I'm using gray, and this is a pretty normal thing for me. And I think for a lot of artists, really, using gray as the common denominator to bring cohesion between colors. The more gray you add to a color, the more that it will behave well with any other color because it has a common denominator of that gray. So if you add 50% gray to it, if the color is 100% saturated and you pull it back by 50%, you can marry that color to other colors that much more effectively. And then if you pull it back another 25%, you really start getting into a place where those colors are all going to basically harmonize together because they're more gray than they are color, and so they all have that common ground. So definitely keep that in mind. I talk a little bit more about that in an episode of my environment design series, the color episode of my environment design series. I'll put a link to that up in the corner for you to grab onto if you want to go check that video out. So you might remember I had talked about whether or not I was going to do her flesh blue or orange based on those exotic frog references I had. And I ended up deciding to go with blue because, well, one, my gut was tugging me in that direction, and two, Nanki, one of the other characters in the group, I think would benefit from that brownish orange color palette better than she would. And so, based on that, I decided that blue, she was going to have to be blue so I could free that color up for another character who I think will definitely look better that color over this color, over a blue color. So now just taking inspiration from the color, the designs on those frogs that I was looking at in the Getting Inspired episode, and also doing kind of like a gradient into a lighter color around where her eyes, mouth, and nostrils are, so that we get a contrast read. And that's if you look at costuming and design from in film and stuff, that's a very typical device, a painterly device where you right where all of the darkness in the features is, if you take the colors and you lighten them to make sure you get like a really nice pop in the read there. Okay, you can see I'm getting that kind of brick red orangey color into the jacket or the vest, just trying to make it feel, like we talked about in the Getting Inspired episode. I'm trying to make it feel futuristic but without feeling stupid. Like it has plenty of normal, grounded, real world features look to it, but it has that little bit of extra something to help it feel like a sci-fi clothing item. I'm putting a little bit of contrast on the holsters just to make them I'm just breaking things up and also tying into that belt buckle, so that there's a little bit of color, or things are tying together, keeping your eye moving around. It's kind of a dance of shaking up the eye enough to be entertained without hitting it so hard with all these different things that it becomes confused, or doesn't enjoy seeing what it's looking at. Okay, so now I'm getting in there with my first shadows, and I'm using the multiply layer mode, and I'm not putting any color at all into the gray. It's just pure gray, that because I'm going to be using white light for this scene, because white light is very sci-fi. And I'm also just doing basically top down. It's just a little bit from the left, top down left. And that's a very basic lighting setup, which is going to allow me to, keep the focus on the each character in the group. The lighting's not going to get weird no matter where they are, because that light's basically just above them all. Okay, now I've also hit an overlay using, again, light gray because of white light. I'm in there just hitting lights onto everything now. And this is all very, very quick stuff. Like I'm not getting in there and being super meticulous or doing any fine rendering or anything like that. Just kind of setting up the feeling of light hitting the character. Oh, I also used a bit of color dodge on the blades to get that orange glow happening. Now back into my multiply layer, cleaning that up a bit. And pretty soon here, I think I'm merge everything down, line work and everything, and then I just start painting over that and leaving some of the line work in and painting some of the line work out. And that's for this kind of graphic novel-y kind of look, that's a pretty typical style. Well, certainly one that I enjoy and I like to use. So you don't go too far into semi-realism. Because, well, for example, imagine if they asked you to do an illustrated novel of these characters, and you did the first thing you sent them was a photorealistic or semi-photorealistic image. That would be insane to keep doing that. and also there's more graphic appeal to, you know, making sure you stay just a little away from realism so that it feels graphic. Okay, so I'm painting some of the lines before I merge everything down. I've actually locked the line layer and I'm painting them some colors. Like the blades, I painted the lines of the blades orange to help them feel like they're glowing. Um, and now I've merged everything down. I made a group first and I merged the group down. So now I have a backup group of what I had done just in case I want to go back. And now everything's merged. So line work, color, all of it. And I'm just going in with an eraser and different colors and just no matter what you do now, it's all on one layer. And I'm just staying on that layer. And it can be good to commit like this and not be nervous and create a new layer, you know, because at least if you have a background of doing traditional especially, it kind of feels like you get that feeling of like, all right, we're in it. You know, I'm working on the painting. Like I'm not working on a painting on top of the painting. I'm just working on the painting. And it'll actually speed your process up exponentially if you can get the confidence going and just work this way. I mean, if you have a really, really out there idea or something that you're not sure about, sure, you know, go ahead and make a layer for sure, absolutely. But, you know, just because if you don't like it, you can delete it. But if you're to go in and start cleaning up and, you know, just giving yourself that nod of approval, of confidence, like I can do this, I'm not going to mess my work up, you know, it's my work. It will speed you up working this way because you're not messing around with what layer was that thing on and where did I do that one thing? Oh crap, I can't find that. You know, everything's all in the same spot, same layer. Here I'm just working the perspective a bit. I felt like by the time you got down to her belt line, you would have seen the perspective would have tilted down enough that you would have seen some of her belt going up and around her waist. Because the horizon line isn't at her belt, it's at her clavicle or something like that. So if the belt is perfectly straight and you can't see up at it or down at it, that means that's the horizon, and that's not where the horizon is. So you should be able to see down at the belt a little bit. So I had to fix that. Just cleaning up some of her, you know, the banding that holds her holsters on and that kind of stuff. Adding little attach points, just little tidbits, things, you know. And because I've established the color palette mostly with shadow and light in the previous passes, I just use my color picker. If I want shadow color, I go find where the shadow color is. If I want light color, I go find where a light color is. And then if I need a new color, then I pick that. Like right here, I'm getting into selling the light source hitting the folds of her leathers. And if you recall, I have a reference for this. I'm not just trying to pull it out of my head, like as if I, you know, painting leather pants, tight leather pants is a thing I do every day. It's not something I do all the time. So, you know, I've got a reference on my monitor above as I work to make sure that I kind of see a real world version of how that material behaves with the light. And you should always have references on hand when you're working. I mean, unless you're doing something that you've done so many times in the past that it's just like you don't even have to think, you know. And even then, I still recommend references because, especially if you're designing, because you want to pull yourself into a place where you're pushing something new. You're not just doing regurgitated ideas. Okay, trying to work on the eyes and make them feel more shiny, round, and alive. Also giving some depth to the nose, the lip. Being careful not to go too human with the lips and nose or eyes, but maintaining a very easy to empathize with structure. You know, all the parts are in the parts we recognize. You can look at this character and see a face that you recognize immediately. Eyes are in the right place, nose, mouth. But when you look at it, you know immediately it's also not a human. And that is basically the goal when you're coming up with creatures that you want your viewers to be able to empathize with. If you don't want them to be able to empathize with them, then you start going crazy and doing stuff like asymmetric or tentacles everywhere or, you know, whatever. Now I'm just reinforcing some of that top-down light, like I spoke about, that top-down white light, and there'll probably be a little bit of last looks when I get all the characters rendered, where and the background starts going in, that little bit of, okay, how do we really want to sell the light, like at the last minute kind of thing. But this is basically my, you know, for starters, we'll go with this kind of a look. Just that little bit of rim light on the top of the most, you know, the most rounded or the most pushed features. And go from there. Oh, now I'm using a little overlay, just hitting overlay and an airbrush and just hitting some of my lights a little bit harder around, because if I'm going to have those hot spots up on the head, then that means the light needs to be just a bit more pushed all around the design. And I think we might be getting close to wrapping this. I didn't go over the top with the design. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So I'm going to do the other 5 characters off screen, and then in the next episode we're going to talk about presentation, how we would send this back to the client. If you don't want to miss that, make sure you subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications of future videos. Also, I hope that some of you guys are following along and designing your own versions of these characters. There will be a link to the specs for those characters in the description. All right. Oh, don't forget to give the video a like. Please comment. That really helps me out if you have anything to say about it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share it with your friends. Ring the bell for notifications of future videos. And I'll see you guys in the next one.